Good evening, everyone. My name is Louis Polito, the Belmar Public Library. Welcome to our author time here at the Belmar Public Library with author Mark W. Curran, here with talking to us about his book, The Witches of Wildwood, Cape May Horror Stories and Other Scary Tales of the Jersey Shore. We have a live audience today with some refreshments and here. And if you are nearby and you hustle on down, you can still join us live if you like. Otherwise, stay tuned and enjoy the show as Mark tells us about his book. So I want to introduce Mark W. Curran. Say hello, Mark.
Hello there, everyone.
Mark is an author who has lived on the Jersey Shore years ago as a musician, and it's during his experiences there that gave him the knowledge to write stories based on the Jersey Shore. And we're all excited to have him here and join us. Now, if you are watching and if you have any comments or questions, you can just pop the a question up here on raise your hand if you tune in. Otherwise, just drop a message and I'll respond to it as I can. Otherwise, till then, let's get going. I want to welcome Mark W. Curran. Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Louis, and welcome everyone to our little author get-together here today. I'd like to say hello to all of our friends in Belmar, New Jersey. How you doing all out there? Hope everybody is doing well, and I really brings back a lot of memories in living on the Jersey Shore for quite a while. I actually grew up in a little town right outside of Philadelphia called Exton, Pennsylvania, right along Route 30 on the main line, and had an opportunity to travel all over this beautiful country and ended up here in Los Angeles. But I will tell you a little bit about that in a bit. But really, the subject of this particular author time is a book that I wrote in 2015 called The Witches of Wildwood, Cape May Horror Stories and Other Scary Tales from the Jersey Shore. And this was a book that I put together after living on the Jersey Shore for roughly three to four summer seasons. And basically, I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and I started writing at a very young age. And I pursued a career as a musician playing rock and roll. And so that brought me to working in nightclubs along the Jersey Shore. And this was back in the late 1970s and the early 1980s, which was a really interesting and unique time for Wildwood, New Jersey. It was kind of, Wildwood was kind of on the tail end of an incredible run. Wildwood, if people, most people are familiar with Wildwood. Some people know about its wonderful history in the annals of rock and roll, but Wildwood was actually the birthplace of rock and roll. So it was quite an honor to play there in the early 1980s. And I had a chance to meet some wonderful musicians, wonderful people, you know, and it was really a great experience, but also had an opportunity to come up with some really fun and interesting story ideas. But to kind of back up a little bit, I had written a novel and a screenplay based on a horror idea that I had. And I was still living in Wildwood at the time. And it was during that period that I started to come up with some ideas on what might make a scary story set in Wildwood. So that was the beginning of a number of years that had gone by when I had come up with all these different ideas and decided to put them in a book. But I had written a novel and a screenplay for a horror movie called Coven, and C-O-V-E-N, and it was a witchcraft story. And it actually prompted me to move to Los Angeles, where I pursued a career as a writer, director, and producer. And I guess you could say I pursued, because I never really achieved great success at it. I never became famous or anything like that, but it was quite interesting because I did end up, after all, making a couple of movies, actually 3 movies. And it was during that period of, say, 2014, 2015, that I decided to take some of these ideas that I had about Wildwood and put them in a book, and hence the book called Witches of Wildwood. Witches of Wildwood, in case anybody, this is the book right here. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. That's it, The Witches of Wildwood. And I'm sure everyone there has, I'm sure everyone that's out there listening right now has gotten their copy of the book and want to know just exactly how these wonderful stories got written. Well, what I'd like to do is kind of give you a little bit of a kind of an overview of a couple of the stories. At least one of the stories that that I wrote was called The Girl in the Attic. And if anyone's ever spent any time, particularly before the 1970s or even during the 1970s, early 80s, they know that Wildwood had a lot of old boarding houses and old rooming houses. And a lot of these places have been torn down since. They tore down a lot of the old rooming houses and they put up condos. But back in those days, there were still quite a few left. And one of the places that I had stayed in was an old Victorian, it was, well, I saw it as an old Victorian mansion, but it was not too far from the beach on Roberts Avenue. And they had these sleeping rooms upstairs.
He'll come back then.
So they had these sleeping rooms upstairs, and it was pretty interesting because there was there were people that would live in these sleeping rooms upstairs that sometimes they would only stay for a week, or they would only stay for a day, or sometimes they would be there for the whole season, depending. But there was one particular girl that I swore was a vampire. And so I came up with this really crazy story called The Girl in the Attic, which I thought was kind of a pretty cool idea, because the idea was that the girl was a vampire and that something was going on before, you know, before it actually happened. So this is what we did. We ended up writing a story about it. When I say we, I had a good friend there at the time, and that particular friend gave me some ideas for the story, and he actually ended up in the story. So this is quite interesting, and I'm gonna see if I can find a passage from that. But let's see here. Well, this was no, this particular one. No, this isn't from that. This is actually another story from the book, but we'll go back to. Well, actually, I think we'll probably end up going back and talking a little bit about The Girl in the Attic. But I'd like to read for you a passage from this. All right, Lewis. Yeah. Lewis, you're still muted there, I believe. Yeah. There we go.
All right, here we go.
Okay.
Yeah, all right.
I kept
Yeah,
going.
you were just talking about the Victorian houses. Yeah. You were just talking about the Victorian.
That was quite a way. That was quite a ways down the road there. Quite a ways. You guys missed it. There was a guy here talking. Okay, so you gotta love technology, right? So anyway, this was a Victorian house, and it was an old boarding house in Wildwood, and it was located just a couple of blocks from the beach. And it was on Roberts Avenue, actually, if you're familiar with Wildwood at all. It was a three-story Victorian home. And they had these sleeping rooms upstairs, and I swear to you, the strangest people would come and stay in these sleeping rooms, they called them. And I thought that the upstairs of this place was just like the weirdest place, because anybody that loves horror knows that attics and basements are always a great place, a great setting for a horror movie, because the attics and the basements are always where our greatest fears lie. They're usually unknown, dark, dank places that contain the worst of what our imaginations can come up with. So I decided, okay, well, that's probably going to be a really good setting. But a lot of my stories are set in basements and attics and things like that. But this particular story was called The Girl in the Attic. And this was a girl who had worked up on the boardwalk, and she had taken a summer job there, and she was staying in the rooms upstairs. And I had this really crazy idea that maybe she was a vampire. Have you ever thought of that, of someone, perhaps a neighbor, a friend? Have you ever thought that maybe perhaps they might be a vampire? Well, I thought of it, and I decided to put it into a story. And thus, that is one of the stories that appears in The Witches of Wildwood. Another story idea that I had for the book was, do you know those, this is really funny. Do you know those old fortune telling machines that they used to have in penny arcades and arcades? What they were was they would have it was like a cabinet, and in the cabinet behind a glass there would have this like animatronic puppet, and it was usually dressed as a gypsy or kind of as a mysterious woman. Some of them were males. Some of them, they have like a genie. They had one, and one was called Zoltar. But this particular one, I always remembered, it really creeped me out because this one I thought looked like a witch. But this fortune telling machine, was actually, it was supposed to be a gypsy, but I thought about it and I thought, wow, she really looks like a witch, and she scared the hell out of me. So I thought, okay, I want to write a story about a fortune telling machine on the boardwalk of Wildwood. Now, what's interesting is that they did have a fortune telling machine on the boardwalk of Wildwood back in the 70s, and I do remember seeing it. And this thing, and then it disappeared. So I don't know what happened to it. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if this gypsy, this witch, came alive and broke out of the cabinet and went on a tear and started terrorizing Wildwood. What would happen? What would be the story? So that one was the fortune telling machine. And I'd like to read a little passage from that for you here. This is from the fortune telling machine. The rain had stopped, and I made my way through the flooded streets toward the ocean. A light mist hung in the air. Drizzle continued to fall, and a chill breeze gave the damp air an edge. Hands thrust deep in my jacket pockets, I walked briskly past dark Victorian boarding houses and neon-lit doo-wop motels. Strange contrasts that were both the beauty and the novelty of the touristy enigma that was Wildwood. It was just past 4 a.m., and nothing stirred inside those dwellings. The streets were empty of people and traffic. I stopped in the middle of Atlantic Avenue. I could see the neat rows of green traffic lights running as far as I could see in both directions, flanked by the periodic certainty of the neon signs of motels which slept on either side of the street. They faded off in the distance quickly in the mist, pastels in a Turkish bath. I walked several more blocks, crossing Surf Avenue, and walked, bent forward, leaning into the moist, cool breeze, my lower back aching. I looked up at the quiet, empty windows of the boarding houses. Rotting sentinels waiting out the seasons before their fall. So that was a passage from, that's one of the passages from the book, which is kind of fun. So
you have to speak up loudly so you can hear you, the microphone.
Oh.
So was that a passage of describing what that fortune teller was thinking as he walked the streets?
no, that was actually I wrote this story in the first person, and this was the guy who was actually narrating the story, and he's walking through the streets, and this is how he experiences Wildwood. And it's kind of a setting. This is just prior to when he goes up on the boardwalk, and the crazed boardwalk fortune teller breaks out of the cabinet and starts coming after him. I'm just setting the scene. I'm not going to, Lewis, I'm not going to give you the meat of the story. The meat of the story can only be gotten one way.
Yep. There you go, right there.
Yeah. You guys crack me up. All right. So anyway, does it? I don't want to just sit and yak. I mean, do you guys have some questions, or do you have any thoughts or things that you'd like to talk about the book, or maybe Wildwood or anything like that?
Did all of the exact, locations in Robert Street and those things, were they all in your memory, or did you have to come back here to check some of this stuff out?
They were all pretty much in my memory. That's a good question. They were all pretty much in my memory, but I had come back to Wildwood once, right after Cozy Morley died, because he was my boss there. I worked at a place called the Club Avalon for Cozy Morley. You probably remember Cozy Morley. I worked in his club, and so after he died, I didn't make it to his funeral, but I went back to visit a couple of members of his family, a couple people that I knew that still lived in Wildwood. So when I came back to Wildwood and I visited, that's when I kind of revisited some of the sites and looked up some of the old streets and that type of thing. So, but a lot of the stories had already been written at that point. So, but yeah, a lot of it, and I also consulted a map. I went back a few times and consulted some maps and things like that. And, I had to kind of refresh my memory, because I was in my 20s when I actually worked in Wildwood in the early to mid 80s. So yeah, I had to kind of refresh my memory there on a couple of those. So at anyway, does anyone else? Go ahead.
Yeah, so for the most part, anyone familiar with Wildwood would recognize a lot of the locations. And you haven't changed the names and locations or stuff, like the street names are the same, hotels are the same, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, pretty much. If there's the streets are still there, I use the actual street names and the actual locations. A lot of these places were places that I had been in or had experienced and had experiences myself in. And of course the street names all remained the same, but some of the clubs and stuff had been since torn down. So and some of I was amazed to see even later, as late as it was, as many years later it was, many of the clubs were still there, but they were all boarded up. They had been boarded up for years. I mean, if you ever spend any time in a place like Los Angeles or Las Vegas, nothing stays boarded up very long. They just tear things down and put other things up, So it was kind of cool. It was like creepy. to go back to Wildwood and see some of these clubs with, like Club Hurricane and some of these clubs were just all boarded up. And I thought it actually got me to thinking about, more horror stories, like what it would be like now after all these years.
Have you written anything else?
Yes, I've mostly been, I haven't written a lot of fiction since then. I've been writing mostly screenplays, and I produced and directed and wrote 2 horror movies. One is called Hoodman, and the other one is called Abandoned Dead. And so most of my writing has been for the screen, but I still dabble a little bit with the fiction. I started writing a novel based on Hoodman, on the movie that I produced and directed back in a couple of years back, about it was like 2019, right before COVID.
Are those movies available?
Yes, they are. They're available on Amazon Prime and on Tubi, tubi.com, and on YouTubeMovies.com. So you can see any of those movies. You can actually see them for free now. Now they have now they're advertising driven, so you can watch the movies for free with with ads. They have ads that play every so many minutes, and you can check them out. So the first movie, it's called Hoodman, Hoodman, and the second movie is called Abandoned Dead. And Abandoned Dead stars, how many of you are fans of Night of the Living Dead? The original Night of the Living Dead from 1969. Okay, well, I've got the lead actress. I got the lead actress from that in my Abandoned Dead movie. Her name is Judith O'Day, and we shot the movie here in Los Angeles. And so that was a kind of a fun one to put together. So I kind of dabble in a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but I haven't done a lot of fiction since this book. But I'm planning on kind of going back to it. I'd like to do a novel. I got about 100 pages into the Hoodman novel, and then I ran out of gas.
Is Hoodman one word?
Yes.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about your writing style. When you write a horror story, these stories, are they more suspense and thriller, or is there, or is there a lot of gore in them? How do you handle that kind of stuff?
Well, I definitely stay away from gore, and I stay away from gore in my writing and in my movies. I tend to go for psychological suspense. I like suspense stories. I like there to be a little bit of mystery, a little bit of crime mystery. There's usually a detective involved, or somewhere in the story. I like to use female characters as the leads, particularly in the movies. Always like to have that a female as the lead character. I think we have enough male-driven drama in movies, and I think I just seem to gravitate toward female characters more than I do male. But as far as the style goes, I like suspense. I like the psychological aspects of introducing something that could be a trick of the mind. Is it a trick of the mind? Is it something that you believe in? Is it a figment of your imagination, or could it really be real? And I like to play with that back and forth, sort of a cat and mouse game with the reader or the viewer, of trying to guess whether or not these things are really happening to this character, or whether it's just a figment of their imagination.
Have you actually had experiences seeing witches or seeing ghouls or seeing spirits yourself?
No, not at all.
They're gonna.
That-
I see.
well, I had a girlfriend once that was a bit devilish. But,
Because even where you're from, Exton, there's a lot of ghost stories out that way, right? Of that
yeah,
whole
there really
county.
are. Yeah, it's really interesting you should say that. I didn't experience a whole, the first horror story I ever wrote was when I was in third grade. It was based on an old mansion that wasn't far from my house where I grew up in Exton. But one of the strangest things was when my mother passed away, I had to go from Los Angeles back to Exton to take care of some of her affairs. And it was quite strange. I was staying at this Holiday Inn. The Holiday Inn was in Lionville, right off of Route 100. And one morning, I didn't know really what was all around there. I just kind of looked out the window when the sun came up the first day I stayed there. And I looked out the window and there was an old mansion right across the creek, right outside my window. And it looked literally like a haunted house. I mean, it like something out of a dream. It just astounded me. I actually thought I was dreaming. And it turned out that house is still there. And I actually wanted to go, but there were legends and ghost stories that were actually written about that house. When I got home, I started to research that house, and that's been quite a couple of years. I'm not completely remembering all the details of it, but it did have something to do with witches in Chester County, and I always thought that would kind of make an interesting. I think that would make also an interesting book. But there is actually a book called The Ghosts of Chester County. Have you read that? Have you read the books of Ghosts of Chester County?
I've read of them, but I'm from that
Okay.
area, so I'm from.
Oh, you're not from that area.
so-
Okay. Yeah.
No, I'm from- Close enough.
Well, I think anything. I think the Quakers were one of like the first to settle that area, and so like wherever there's Quakers, there's a ghost story somewhere close by. But there haven't been a lot of things written about that. I've come up with tons of stories for movies and stuff, but it's really quite complicated. I mean, the publishing business right now and the movie business is very, very difficult for fiction and writers and things like that. So it's very hard to get your stories out there. It's very hard to get your stories published by a major publisher. It's very hard to get any movies made, or very difficult to sell a screenplay. I moved to Los Angeles in 1987 and began a career as a writer, trying to write for television. And I had an agent, and I wrote scripts for television shows like Family Ties and The Cosby Show and Miami Vice and all these. But I was never able to sell any of those scripts, and I struggled for years before, and working odd jobs and things. Then eventually realized that the only way I was ever going to see my work made into a movie was to make it myself. So, and this is after years of trying to raise money, trying to get investors, and the thing would fall through. And so it's been a bit of a struggle, but I'm very fortunate because cameras became affordable, and before you know it, well, not before you know it. I mean, eventually what happened was you didn't have to shoot a movie on film anymore. You could shoot a movie digitally. First it was digital tape, and then it was just digital. I mean, now you can film a whole movie on a hard drive. So that was the only thing that made it affordable enough for me to be able to make my own movies. And similarly with self-publishing, with writing, with like writing The Witches of Wildwood. That book is a self-published book. It's doubtful a major publisher would pick up a book like that because I'm not a known writer. So it's a do-it-yourself kind of world now. And you put it out there and you have a smaller audience, much smaller audience. But I was lucky enough to get my movies out on streaming platforms like Amazon Prime and Apple TV, Tubi TV. And so the movies have been seen by a lot of people. And though it's not really that profitable of a business, it's certainly nice to be able to have your work seen and enjoyed by people. That's the main thing. That's why I do it, because I want my work to be seen and enjoyed by people. And, if you have a dream, I've always said this, if you have a dream, go for it. Don't be afraid to fail. I failed so many times. I couldn't put them all in a book. The book would be too big. Yeah. I just kept trying and trying and trying. And if I failed and I couldn't get one thing, I couldn't get it done one way, I'd get it done another. And that's how I got these movies made. I made them myself. I produced them, I wrote them, I directed them, did all the hired people to do the artwork. But I mean, so where there's a will, there's a way.
How long did it take you to come up with all these stories? Were these stories, you mentioned before, you had them kind of like bubbling around in your head a little bit. From the time you started putting it together seriously into the format of a book, how long did it take?
The stories had been floating around for quite a while. In fact, I started to formulate these stories. Being a big Stephen King fan, I always wanted to be a fiction writer. Stephen King and Clive Barker and Dean Koontz are kind of my idols, Harlan Ellison. So when I lived in Wildwood and I was starting to come up with these ideas for stories, I started looking at everything in terms of a story. When you start looking at things in terms of in the context of what kind of a story they would make, that started back in the early 80s. But I didn't actually sit down to write it until say 2015, 2014. So I would say from the time I sat down and actually put it together to the time the book came out, about 2 years. About 2 years. Yeah, took about 2 years.
Is it possible to scare you anymore then? Or are you past that?
I was pretty scared during the pandemic.
Yes.
That was frightening. That was truly frightening. I mean, you couldn't go outside your house. I mean, you were afraid. I was afraid to get near any living, breathing thing. That's truly fear. I mean, that was awful. I mean, that was just terrible. But as far as being scared by things, I've always kind of looked at horror from a different point of view than a lot of people do. I always looked at it kind of like as an art form, just like maybe somebody who writes romance novels, or maybe somebody who writes erotic, sex books or whatever. They look at it in a different way. They draw from their own experiences, but I wouldn't say anything really scares me in a horror sense, like that. But there are moments, like there's a movie coming out this week that looks pretty damn scary. I'm gonna get it's called Pray for the Devil. Have you guys seen this yet? Pray for the Devil is coming out this week. Have you seen the trailer for this? That looks pretty spooky. That looks pretty scary. So I'm gonna go see that next week.
Now, is that like pray as praying to the devil, or is it like pray as in
Yeah.
like the like the food?
That's a-
Yeah.
No, that's a good question. They did a play on words with the pray word. It's PREY. So it's pray, you know. So the idea is a possession
Oh.
story. Yeah, it's a possession story. So like what it is like these, I don't know, there's some nun aspect to it, which makes it really, you know, kind of interesting. And so apparently, you know, the devil picks these people out that he preys on, but yet but since they're nuns, they pray, you know. So how clever is that?
Comedy.
How
Oh my
clever is
goodness.
that?
So
Yeah, it does look pretty scary.
It seems as if you've spent maybe half of your life on the West Coast and half on the East Coast. Can you say anything about comparing them? And do you think you'll ever come back east?
Can I say
Born
anything?
and raised.
Okay, I think one of
You
your
can
words.
be honest. You can be honest.
Yeah.
Yes. Be
Well,
honest. Let us know. We like to be honest.
I really do. I spent most of my life on the East Coast. I didn't move to the West Coast until I was in my late 20s. Well, I guess, you know, you're right, half and half. But I love the East Coast for a lot of different reasons, but I just couldn't handle two things that I didn't like about the East Coast. One was the weather. You know, just miserable all the time. I mean, it's either too hot, too cold, you know, it's humid. I mean, come on, you know. And then the other problem was, you know, if you're a writer or a filmmaker, you know, and you're stuck in Jersey, I mean, there's no worse hell than that. You know, because there's nobody, especially back in those days. Now there's more filmmakers in New Jersey, but back then, I mean, if you told somebody you were going to make a film, they thought you were out of your mind, you know. So you have to go to where the action is, you know. And so being interested in film and writing and music and all that, because I'm a musician by trade, the West Coast was really the place to go, where, you know, where there's that iconic legendary thing of going to where the sun set, and it's, you know, beautiful most of the year around here, and it's where all the studios are, it's where the music studios are, it's where the recording studios are, it's where the movie studios are, and all the people that you need to make a movie. So it just made a lot of sense for me to move to Los Angeles when I did. Although I'll tell you, it was pretty scary because I didn't know anybody in Los Angeles. I didn't know anyone at all. I had no family, no friends here. And I didn't have a lot of money. So I loaded up my station wagon and drove out to LA. It was really kind of a crazy thing when you think about it, but it worked out.
If you were ever to make a movie out of some or one of your stories, would it be set in black and white? Because the whole vibe of the book that I see in the cover and the markings, all that stuff, there's a certain like black and white. It's very colorless. Is that the kind of look, that kind of dark Victorian pre-color look?
Well, yeah, I think I get what you're saying, where sort of a lot of the color is sucked out of it, you know, where you see these movies where you'll see it's a very cold kind of colorless tone. And I think you're right. I don't know if I would go completely black and white with it, though. That's sort of a little bit of a different vibe. And it was very difficult to sell a black and white movie to the public. A lot of the public doesn't, although it's been done quite well by a couple of filmmakers. There was one not too long ago that made one, if you recall, she was from Iran or something, and she made a vampire movie in Iraq or Iran or something. Iran, I think it was, an Iranian director, female. She starred in it, she directed it. It was a vampire movie. She did a wonderful job on it. But something like that, I think, you know, black and white. But I definitely see a movie, if I were to make a movie from one of these stories, that it wouldn't be a bright and colorful thing. It would be a dark, with a limited palette of colors, very tonally, maybe kind of like a dark blue or a darkish, you know, a darkish tone. So I think the answer is sort of yes, yeah.
Black, like mostly muted colors.
Muted colors, yeah, yeah.
That's pretty cool. All right.
Well, about how many stories are in the book?
About there's
Or do you know? Do you know exactly?
you know, I just happened to
I'm
know
trying to
that
keep
number.
believing.
I just happened to know that number. It's 11. No, it's actually 10.
Okay.
It's actually 10. There's 10 short stories, and then there's a novella, which is like a short version of a novel is a novella, which is actually the title story, The Witches of Wildwood, is the novella. And that story, the novella, came about when I was sitting in Max Pizza on the boardwalk at Roberts Avenue with a friend of mine who also appears in The Girl in the Attic. And we were having a pizza at Max, and 3 girls walked in. They were goth girls from Philadelphia. And if you ever seen a goth girl, back then they didn't have many goth girls, but these girls were complete gothic. They had gothic makeup on, and they were like Italian girls from Philadelphia, South Philly, I guess. And we started to talk about these girls, you know, like what kind of a story could we make up about these girls? And I thought, well, you know, what if they're like murderous? Like, what if they're murderesses? Like, they're out killing people, but they dress like goth girls. And my friend said, well, no, let's make them. What if they're witches? They're actually modern day witches, and they're like, they're not mortals, you know. They're witches. They live forever, and they have this. I said, well, let's put the idea together. They're witches, and they're sisters, and their thing is they like to seduce people and kill them. How's that for a story? I thought that was pretty cool. So there you go. And
So
now,
what kinds
and
of
now,
evil?
and now, boys and girls, it's time for another passage from Witches of Wildwood. This is from the story of the fortune teller, the gypsy fortune teller, and this is a passage from that. Now, the name of the gypsy fortune teller that's in the little fortune telling machine, her name is Rowena, Madame Rowena, and she was built by a Russian. Well, perhaps there are shades of her in here, I don't know, but Rowena was actually built by a Russian immigrant who built cabinets for a living. And I don't know how that actually ties into this particular passage, but let me read you a passage from it. Rowena sits in a corner of a firelit cabin at a round table. Before her are tarot cards laid out in the pattern of a cross. She is alone. She concentrates deeply on the cards and begins to cry. Her cry changes to an awful wailing sound, like a banshee in the throes of hellfire. Her cry turns to laughter. an uncontrollable, almost gleeful laugh like some madman from a horror movie. A wicked witch hag of a laugh. And then her young face turns to ashen gray. Pock marks of black grow larger. She ages, and within seconds she is a haggardly witch. The fire goes dead, the room goes dark, and there is silence. As if catapulted out of a nightmare, I am back on the boardwalk, staring into the eyes of a mannequin. The mannequin is Madame Rowena. And as I watch, Madame Rowena starts to move. So in that, our narrator was having our narrator was having a dream, a nightmare, and then he woke up, and then he goes for a walk on the boardwalk, and that's when this machine has been left outside of the arcade where he works, and there's no explanation as to why the machine had been left outside, because they had put it inside. And so that's where he begins. He's staring at this woman, and she begins to come to life inside the cabinet. What happens next? Oh, the only way to find out what happens next, ladies and gentlemen, is to buy yourself a copy of The Witches of Wildwood, now available at fine stores everywhere, including Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and Walmart.
Yes.
Really?
Walmart.
Excellent.
Wow. So,
Walmart.
what other kind of ghouls, monsters, or other creepy creatures you got in there?
Oh, we've got a werewolf.
You got witches.
We've got a
Yeah.
werewolf. Yeah, we've got vampires, werewolves, ghosts. What else do we have? We have witches, of course. And we also have a Jersey Devil. You cannot have a horror. You cannot have a horror story set in New Jersey without a Jersey Devil. And oh boy, do I have a Jersey Devil. My Jersey
Can you
Devil.
describe the Jersey Devil?
I can, because in the story, The Jersey Devil, there is a developer of casinos and real estate. He lives in Atlantic City. He decides he's going to go to Wildwood, New Jersey to wipe out the whole boardwalk and put up casinos. And he's driving down the Garden State Parkway, and he is driving as he drives, he gets down to the Cape May exit. He gets off the exit on going the wrong way, and he ends up in the swamps of New Jersey, where the Jersey Devil tracks him down like a dog. And this is the story of how this man battles the Jersey Devil. And the man, I don't know, he bears a striking resemblance to Donald Trump.
So on average, how big are the stories? How many pages are the stories? Are they quick reads? Are they
Oh yeah, some of them are short, some of them are long. They're about 20 pages. About, the average is about 20 pages per story. And then the novella is quite a bit longer, like 60 pages, that kind of thing. That's about 300 pages or so. And it's also available in paperback. It's also available in hardback and Kindle as well.
So if you enjoy not writing fiction as much as writing other things, why don't you find a real horror story to embellish and have it be historical fiction, which seems to be a very popular thing these days? I mean, there's a lot of stories here that could really be embellished. I think. By
Yeah,
someone like
absolutely.
you,
Absolutely.
not me.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I well, I enjoy. It isn't that I. It isn't that I don't enjoy writing fiction. I mean, it's not that I don't enjoy it. It's just very laborious. The process of writing is a labor, time intensive thing, and there's so many things that I want to do. You know, I've got so many projects going on. I've got, you know, I went to Nashville and recorded an album of country music that I wrote. I've got, you know, movies that I want to direct, movie ideas. So it's more of a matter of not having enough time. If I could figure out a way to clone myself, uh, I have like, you know, 10 of me. I think one of me would love to just be a fiction writer, you know, just doing horror stories, much like say Stephen King or Dean Koontz, that kind of thing. But you do have an interesting and well taken point that there are so many great horror stories that are based in real life, and there are so many good stories just in New Jersey alone. I mean, we're talking like Cape May within, you know, Cape May itself just has tons and tons of true stories that could be written into, you know, now were you talking about writing a nonfiction book about the real stories, or taking the real stories and basing a fiction on them?
It could go either way. I mean,
It
look
could.
how many things have mentioned the years, the Jersey Devil. I mean,
Yes.
that's an example of, and who's to say what's real or not? I mean,
That's right. You are absolutely right. And
so
I
you take a Gold House, or you take the rum runners in along the Navsink and the Atlantic Islands, and stories like that could be based in fact, but embellished to make it be more spooky or fun, or, you know, put your own spin on it from the
absolutely.
macabre.
Absolutely. I did come up recently. I came up with a Jersey Devil story that I wanted to turn into a novel that, you know, based on actual accounts of people who were monster hunters who had gone to the Pine Barrens and went looking for the Jersey Devil, and some of the strange occurrences that happened while they were doing it. And so taking that as a framework, I thought about, you know, some characters, some fictional characters, like a family and maybe a young girl and maybe her father, and maybe a few other characters that were, you know, modern day characters. You know, we have a high school girl, we have a father who's trying to make ends meet without a mother, you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, take the modern day monster hunter that might have maybe a TV show, like a reality show, for instance, and put them all together and have them go on this trip into the Pine Barrens to you know, to find the Jersey Devil. And then, but what they discover is something even bigger than the Jersey Devil. Wouldn't that make a great novel?
Yes.
Let's
That
do it.
would be canoe-
Let's
that would
do
be
it.
Canoeing down one of the rivers
I wanna see the movie.
on a camping trip. We expect it out in another like 2 years.
I'm gonna get to work. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate Lewis. I appreciate you having me there. This is great. I'm enjoying having the conversation with the audience rather than me yakking away. Better.
Yeah, this working out to be pretty good. I got to work on the tech end on my end here. I obviously have some Wi-Fi issues to deal with, but I'm really happy that this is generally overall working out. You guys like this format? Pretty nice?
Yes,
For
very nice.
authors who can't make it all the way out here.
Yeah.
So this is pretty much was like a pioneering event in developing future events like this. So, and we definitely wish to have you come back one time when you get your next book out, or
I would love
maybe
to.
do Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I have one question.
Sure.
As growing up as a young boy, what were your favorite movies or TV shows that had witches in them?
That had witches in them? Wow, I don't think there were that many witch stories that I really like, but I I grew up, during the 60s, so I would say, Dark Shadows was a big influence. I started reading at a very young age, so thanks to my local library. I mean, I lived in that library. Um, and that's the other thing. I mean, when I was in high school, you know, I wasn't a person that got involved with intramural sports or or hanging out with people at the high. I was always in the back. I was the strange kid in the back of the library that was writing these crazy stories and reading. And I remember one of the biggest influences that I had was Stephen King. I read a lot of Stephen King, but I also read one of my biggest influences.
The movie Carrie?
Oh yes,
Carrie?
yeah, Carrie, The Exorcist was big for me. Some of the scary movies that were out during that period. There was some of them. They're slipping my old brain right now, but the books stand out more than anything. And one of those was a writer named Harlan Ellison, which was a huge influence on me when I was growing up. So.
What did you think of the monster movies of the 20s and 30s and early 40s? The Draculas, the Frankenstein movies, the Mummy movies back then. Abbott and Costello did Meet the Mummy, that kind of thing. Remember those?
Oh yeah.
Part two, yeah.
Yeah, we used to stay up late at night and watch Dr. Shock. Yeah. Remember that? And Dr. Shock used to run all those old movies, from the Universal monster movies, and even the Abbott Costello stuff. Yeah, I loved all that stuff. Yeah, I it's funny that didn't follow me into my later life. I have a lot of friends who were really like totally into the monster thing, and I never really was. I like the modern like monsters more, like the horror movies that came out in the 80s, like John Carpenter and some of that kind of stuff. Halloween, The Thing, which I thought was brilliant. So I was more into the horror of the 80s than I was back the old 50s and 60s Universal monster stuff.
Did you ever see Horror Hotel? It's one of the best B movies you can find.
I probably
Horror
have.
Hotel.
I probably have. Yeah. It's not ringing a bell. I mean, it sounds like a familiar. It sounds like a movie that I've seen, but the title is, I'm not gelling with the title. The title sounds familiar. Yeah. Horror Hotel. I just thought I'd throw that in for the hell of it.
Well, coming up at about an hour on, and going to say, does anybody have any last minute questions for her?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was great.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much for joining us. And it was a really interesting and we're exciting. Copies of the book are on their way for us here at the library for check out. And as he said, the books are unavailable on Barnes and Noble, on Amazon, Walmart, and
Lewis did not mention to any of you, but I'll bring it up now, that these books make great Christmas gifts.
Yes, yes, they do.
What a stocking
Yes, they
stuffer
do.
that would make. And I'm telling you, when you want to give a gift that keeps on giving, give the gift of Wildwood this year.
guys are hustling. I love it.
You know,
Like
these are limited, these by their very nature are limited editions, and thus, who knows in how many years these may become collector's items worth millions of dollars on the collector market.
Never know.
So, you know, I mean, don't wait until then. Don't wait until they become collector's items. Go ahead, run right out right now and order your copy of The Witches of Wildwood. And then I can say that I actually sold 10 copies. Thank you.
Sign copies and come to New Jersey?
Do I what?
Will you come to New Jersey and sign copies of your book?
Oh, absolutely not. You couldn't pay me to come to New Jersey. However, I will sign the book. Yeah. That was my attempt at humor. I can see that really fell flat.
Well, Jersey's clearly too scary.
It must be. It's the delay, Lewis. I think that's what it is. It's the delay is throwing. The delay is throwing off my comedic timing. Yes, I will sign the book, but you have to send the book to me, or if you order the book from me directly, I will sign it and send it to you. So you can, there's a link that you can go to on my website. If you go to witchesofwildwood.com, there's a link there that you can use to order the book directly from me, and I will sign it and dedicate it to whomever you would like.
The link to
And
the
then
site is on our website too.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, that'll do it. All right, and remember always.
Yeah, so I have the link to your site.
And remember, this is
Yeah, I
my
have the
big.
link to your site on our website. Yeah.
This is my big closing, Lewis. Don't interrupt me. Support
Go ahead, sorry.
support your local library.
Yes. Mark, thank you so much. Pleasure having you with us. I'll reach out to you later on. Thank you. Yes, and for everyone watching online or watching later on, if they make it this far, and once again, Mark W. Curran, live from Los Angeles with his book, Witches of Wildwood, Cape Bay Horror Stories, and Other Scary Tales of the Jersey Shore. Thank you, Mark. Take care.
Goodbye,
Have a great
all.
night.
Thank you. Take care.